There has been great controversy over a viral video showing a woman named Shiloh Hendrix allegedly admitting to saying the N-word towards a young black boy because the young black boy allegedly stole her 10-month-old diaper bag. And in that video, she actually proceeds to call the person who was filming her, who was apparently dark-skinned, the N-word several times, and she shamelessly just basks in it. And this video has caused a debate across the political and cultural spectrum on the issues of white guilt and racial relations in America and the current condition of the race debate. And Miss Hendrix has raised well over $500,000 as of the posting of this video. It's been over $620,000, and it's bound to rise even more. But my problem with this whole saga is that it misses the key point in several areas, especially when it relates to the proper condition of healthy social relationships. And it also misses the point when it comes to the race debate. The reaction does. And I think that if we're going to be able to get any ounce of sanity out of this matter, we ought to consider things a little bit more of a deeper light. In this video, we're going to do just that. But, my friends, before we do that, hello. I am Christian Watson. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can, my friends, to ensure that we get our message out there. Even if you disagree with me, my friends, we are building a movement of thinkers that is going to barnstorm the political landscape, and we're going to bring forth the old principles that established America as the shining city on a hill, as the paragon of New World virtue, that set the tone for the rest of the world to follow, and most importantly, improve the quality of human life better than any other system had in human history. So if that is something you want to be a part of, then please like, share, comment, subscribe. Thank you so much. Now please enjoy the video. So, as I mentioned, this debate over this clip has been rather eye-opening for me and rather disturbing to me on several levels. The first thing that's disturbing to me is the fact that the object of Miss Hendrix's critique is a child, a 5-year-old child nonetheless. And any society that fails to secure and protect its posterity can either go one of two directions. Number one, utter annihilation, because if you fail to secure the future while the future is maturing and being cultivated in the present, then you will have no future. Or you could have a future, but that future, and this is the second option, could be one of antagonism, one of factionalism, one of fighting, amidst which society cannot at all exist. And so I have a serious problem with anyone taking their anger out on a child, even if the child or the toddler or whatever did something wrong. This is the second object that I find quite disturbing. So any healthy society is going to realize that children are inherently innocent. The concept of childhood innocence is integral to how we view children. And part and parcel to the concept of childhood innocence is a sort of childlike naivety towards the world. It's an ignorance, but not just any old ignorance. It's an ignorance of the brutalities that the world inherently has. It's an ignorance of the evils of the world. It's an ignorance of the nasty stuff of life. And the reason a moral society decides to protect children from knowledge of that is so that they can mature up to a point where their minds have the capacities and the moral learning to deal with those things without going crazy or without seeping into despair, two possibilities which even many people who do have the capacity seep into, and they end up destroying their lives. Now, unfortunately, in Western civilization, many people have utterly rejected the idea of childhood innocence, and we have decided that children are somehow masters of their own destiny at such a very young age, and that they should be subject to the entire realm of possibilities that adults are subject to. This is nowhere more evident than in the gender debate, the notion that children can somehow decide their gender. Although that's neither here nor there, but I just think the concept of childhood innocence in society is being undermined. And in this particular instance, with Miss Hendrix calling a young boy, an innocent childlike toddler, a slur, she is also effectively undermining the principle of childhood innocence. It is not acceptable. Toddlerhood is a period where you're supposed to make mistakes, and those mistakes are supposed to be corrected, but not by an adult that should know better, leveraging a malevolent insult towards someone who obviously does not know better and really should not know better at that age until they are reared into knowing better. So on and so forth. But the second disturbing part I find about this whole situation is the reaction from various commentators and various people on the internet. there are a few arguments that have actually emerged trying to justify the donation amounts to Miss Hendricks, and also trying to justify the kind of posture she had towards the young boy. One of those arguments is rather curious. It's that white people are pushing back. Now, this argument goes as follows: that after years of diversity, equity, inclusion, and affirmative action and race-based programs designed to exalt minorities and to depress white populations, this is somehow a justified pushback against that trend. And some variations of these arguments even go as far to say that the Karmelo Anthony fundraiser, which has raised a similar amount of money, I think this has actually raised more than that at this point now, is evidence that white folks have to push back. And so Shiloh Hendrix is seen as an avatar, a grand avatar for white resistance. Well, I have a few problems with this particular argument. The first is, it's an utter non sequitur. It assumes that a lady making a malevolent remark to a child on a playground at somewhere in Minnesota in the United States is somehow part and parcel of a general movement to defend a group of people that she only belongs to by virtue of her skin color and by virtue of no other ideological signifier. It is utter non sequitur. It is a conclusion that does not follow from the situation and is instead a product of the imagination, the wicked imaginations, I might even add, of those who are bound by the spirit of tribalism. Now, I'll get into that in a second. But second, there is an element of truth to this argument, but the solution that some people were proposing is utterly incorrect. The element of truth is that, yes, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which, by the way, I've been one of the biggest, most outspoken voices against DEI. I even did a video for Prager University called The DEI Disaster, where I literally denounce it and I tear it apart in so many different ways. And I've done speeches at college campuses against DEI. So I'm one of the most outspoken critics of DEI. I believe that it's a philosophically unsound system. I believe it creates resentment. I believe that it is unjust. It is actually treats justice as a matter of utility as opposed to a matter of principle. There's so much wrong with it. Having said that, that does not mean you cannot conflate programs put forth by institutions with people those programs are supposedly going to benefit and assume those people have a responsibility or have blame for the effects of those programs. I remind you that these programs, a lot of these race-based programs, were instituted by people that were of Caucasian of origin. But it doesn't matter, because this is not a matter about skin color. This is a matter of ideology. Ideology is always going to be more descriptive and more intelligible to any situation than skin color will be. But to assume that it's okay to now chastise and be malevolent to your neighbor because they bear a certain skin color and you have resentment towards a certain policy is also to, again, go into a very, very egregious error. So I absolutely agree, though. There has been a culture of resentment and anger put towards white populations. And that culture has been magnified by some people, especially some people on the radical left. That does not then therefore justify an equally repugnant culture of resentment and hatred to be magnified by people whose minds are shackled by identity. What it instead justifies is a need, an initiative to push back and go towards a benevolent disposition, to push back and go towards a culture where mutual respect and common humanity are emphasized and everything else is not emphasized. But the problem is this movement that is trying to stoke racial conflict right now by way of this particular event is rooted in antagonism, and it opposes a social peace. No society can exist if the social peace is constantly imperiled by faux conflicts, false conflicts, born of the imagination, driven by activists who have no sense of reality. Another thing I find very disturbing about this whole thing is that some commentators, I won't mention names, are suggesting that black populations, minority populations, are losing moral currency and whites are beginning not to care. Now, other than this being a gross generalization, other than this being a very poor way of actually conducting any kind of truthful sentiment, the idea of moral currency itself actually is part of this problem, because moral currency is an erroneous concept. See, moral currency treats morality as a triviality. Moral currency treats moral behavior as a commodity to be traded and sold and used for utility, as opposed to treating moral behavior as the natural outcome of man evaluating his nature asking himself, what principles constitute my humanity that should guide my conduct as I try to exist in society? Morality, properly understood, is not about currency. It's not about utility. It is about those rules and principles of conduct that emerge from human nature, that are universal, that are objective, and without which society would not exist. But the problem is, this whole debate, much like the race debate in general, has become a matter of utility. It's become a matter of who can win and who can lose. It's become a matter of groups. And in the midst of this kind of confusion, in the midst of this kind of chaos of concepts, we are losing sight of the concrete reality. Which leads me to another point about this whole thing that disturbs me. So you guys are getting a very animated Christian Watson today. This debate demonstrates a problem of speculation. What is speculation? Well, the Scottish Enlightenment philosophers had a sort of resentment, similar to me, towards any concept or notion that was divorced from reality and was instead forged by imagination or forged by biases that had no grounding in empirical reality. And a lot of the statements being made about this, again, that Shiloh Hendrix is somehow an avatar of some kind of racial pushback, are rooted in speculation. And the problem is, when your arguments are rooted in speculation, you have no ability to actually make a substantive claim or to find the truth. You have only an ability to explore a concept you already accept to be true and then to push that concept forth into reality. The problem is, what if your concept is false? What if your concept is not only false, but it tends towards the deterioration of the society? Not only that, what if your concept not only tends towards the deterioration of the society, but also tends towards a kind of delusion, a mass delusion, in which others get involved in it and things get even worse? Speculation removes all the guardrails that an epistemically responsible society is supposed to have when it comes to finding truth. The imagination will create this scenario where something is grander than it is. What if instead of this being a massive racial watershed, this is simply a case of a woman who is not taught in good manners, whose passions are wild, who does not have the ability to handle conflict resolution, saying an inappropriate comment towards a toddler, and her needing to be corrected for it? Why does it have to be this grand civilizational epic? Because the imaginations of so many different people treat independent events as part of this broad continuum of things without satisfying that or without justifying that. And in doing so, they create a fantasy and they try to will the fantasy into existence by ways of soaking resentment online, by ways of trying to make roving generations about a particular racial group, by way of trying to justify clearly bad behavior in the name of some kind of enlightened project in their mind. The problem of speculation is clearly on display here, my friends, and we must be serious about this. We must not only take this seriously, we must be willing to say, hey, no matter what your race is, no matter what your ideology is, no matter what your politics is, if you pride yourself on being a rational member of civil society, you must then therefore say, I am not going to engage with the world through my imagination. I'm going to engage with the world through my senses. And what I see with my senses, I need to refine with my mind. And what I refine again with my mind, I need to test against first principles. And what I test against first principles, I need to make sure is good and true and conforms to the order of reality. And what conforms to the order of reality, as Kant says, must be universalized so that we can ensure a proper and safe social condition. But as long as we continue to stoke resentment through things like this, as long as we continue to blow things out of proportion and use our imaginations as opposed to our senses as a guide, as long as we continue to engage in this kind of tribalistic nonsense, as long as commentators, who I won't mention the names, talk about moral currency in group terms, as opposed to even if you accept the idea of moral currency, individuals trade currency, groups don't trade currency. It's ridiculous. Even if you accept the idea, which was absurd in the first place. As long as we continue to do this kind of stuff, my friends, every like event, not only will there be more events like this, but every like event will move towards the division of society where there need not be so much division. Another thing I think is very important here is the issue of tribalism. There are several tweets. There was one tweet that said that if particular groups are tribalistic towards someone like Karmelo Anthony, then tribalism all around is justified. Well, not only is this a bad argument. If someone decides to go and murder somebody, that does not therefore mean murder is justified. it also kind of exposes the flaws of tribalism. Let us assume that Miss Hendricks is a representative for all the aggrieved people of the Caucasian origin who believe in this identity construct. Let's assume. Okay. If that's the case, how in the world do you handle differences? The problem with tribalism is that tribalism cannot handle ambiguity or differences. You can have, so it's unclear as to whose tribe she's in, because there are a lot of different people that have white shade of skin who have vastly different beliefs and who fight about it. Same thing with the black people. That's why when you have this kind of collective thinking, it tends towards chaos and nonsense, because you can't get over the ambiguity. But differences. There are also, as I mentioned, a lot of different people that have that same shade of skin who also have different conceptions of that skin. If someone is a red-blooded American, they may not even believe their race is significant at all. They'll believe that instead their Americanism is significant. And that is what matters. The tribalistic account of this event not only demonstrates the fallacies of tribalism, it can't get over ambiguity or differences, it also demonstrates the laziness of tribalism. It's much easier to point at something and say, hey, that person's in my tribe, that person represents me, as opposed to justifying that by doing the hard work that philosophy demands, that sound argumentation demands. I 100% support pushing back against anti-white culture in any culture that assigns a sense of collective guilt upon any race or any group. Not only do I support pushing back against that, if we want to have a benevolent society, we must do that. I 100% agree with calling out the problems that happen to occur within African American culture. In fact, I've been doing that for years. Not only do I agree with that, I agree that it should be an ecumenical process. Everyone, not just people from African American communities, but everyone who cares about the well-being of the youth, who are involved in gang crime, who are involved in the glorification of violence, who are involved in drugs, should come together so we can all help unite in our common humanity to fix this problem. I think all of these things are very important things to touch on. But this Shiloh Hendrix situation, that's not the emphasis. The emphasis is not construction, it's destruction. The emphasis is not thought, it's anger. The emphasis of these Shiloh Hendrix supporters is not trying to articulate a benevolent and effective solution towards anti-white hatred or collective guilt that the left has pushed upon America over all these years. It is instead attempting to use a principle that is the inverse of collective guilt, but is of the same foundation to then punish minorities for some perceived wrong, as opposed to realizing that evil, not race, is what's at stake here. We must realize this, my friends, if we really wish to address this problem, and we wish to address it forcefully. My friends, indecency is not the answer to political correctness. Indecency simply deteriorates social principles, gives rise to the vicious ones, and creates a character within our culture, within our civilization, that is repugnant to good sense, that is repugnant to manners, and only lends itself to antagonism. And this kind of indecency that we are seeing from people giving her money because they're tired of minorities or whatever is not going to lead anywhere good. Let's have these important conversations about someone like Karmelo Anthony, who most certainly murdered an innocent white kid. But let's also have conversations about someone like Shiloh Hendrix, who has no manners, who clearly has low impulse control, and obviously rejects childhood innocence. Both of those figures should be chastised by good people, should be studied as examples of what not to do and what not to be in society. And neither of them should be held up as heroes as to what to aspire to. The moment we do that is the moment we lose our sense of what heroism means. And along with it is the moment we compromise our sense of what virtue is. Let's not do that. My friends, we have to have a better solution to this kind of stuff. Because if we don't, I'm afraid American culture will continue to suffer from the perils of division. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can to ensure that we can get our message out there. My friends, study history, study philosophy, be morally vigilant, please stay pensive. Bye, guys.